So recently, the Western Cape High Court handed down a judgment that declares that the President and Cabinet have failed to fulfil their constitutional obligations to respect, protect, promote and fulfil the rights in some sections of the Constitution, and that such conduct is invalid. The President and Cabinet, together with Parliament, have been directed to rectify this failure within 24 months and to enact legislation to recognise marriages solemnised in accordance with the tenets of Sharia law, Muslim marriages as valid marriages, and to regulate the consequences of such recognition. To talk about the judgment's significance, we are joined in the studio by Professor Farid Esak. He's the head of religion studies at the University of Johannesburg. And also from our Cape Town studios, we've got Siham Samai. She's the director of the Women's Legal Centre Trust, and Ayesha Roika. It's good to have all of you. Thank you very, very much for joining us on Morning Live. Ladies, firstly, thank you to you.
Morning, Leanne. Thanks for having us.
Morning. It's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for your time. And of course, Prof, in Johannesburg with me, thank you very, very much. I know that you're under quite tight time constraints, so I want to jump into my questions towards you first. So this, I imagine, has been welcomed, it's been praised. My question is, why has it taken so long?
Well, it has taken a long time. First of all, I mean, the whole thing started even under the apartheid dispensation, although the intentions at that time was very, very different, basically trying to get legitimacy amongst the Muslims who, on the whole, weren't very well disposed towards the regime. In the current democracy, there has been significant tensions between two different tendencies. The one is a number of Muslim, more conservative, more traditional leaders have said that there is no need to have Muslim cases going to secular courts for adjudication, and that the system had worked just fine. And just fine, generally, in a male-dominated world, mean that the system works just fine for men.
For men,
right.
Yes. Okay.
So that was the one fairly organized and strong tendency, at least strong in terms of authoritative power over the community. The other tendency has been with struggling to find the compatibility between some of the provisions of that's intrinsic to Muslim marriages on the one hand, and on the other hand, the constitutional requirements of gender equality. So it hasn't been an easy task to ameliorate or to satisfy both of these tendencies. However, if you look at the pressures that have been coming from these, particularly from the conservative or more traditional Muslim leadership structures on the one hand, and on the other hand, just the ordinary day-to-day battles that many Muslim women have been facing upon the death of their male spouses, or in the events of a divorce and how they've been disadvantaged. Certainly, the government could have done much more. There has been a political will on the part of the government, but the mechanisms, the different subcommittees of the law commission that have been put in place have just been extraordinarily slow in giving effect to this political will.
I want to bring our ladies now into the conversation, because particularly from the WLC, that's the Women's Legal Centre. Now, it was you, and Siham, I bring this question to you. In the application, this was really for the recognition of Muslim marriages, and it was brought by your organisation, your centre, which said it was aimed at providing Muslim women and their children with legal protection upon divorce. So, Siham, this is a very significant judgment for women and children married in Islamic law, and a great victory for you. How are you feeling about it?
Indeed, yes, it is a victory, not just for the Women's Legal Centre, but I think for the thousands of women who have, over the past 20 years, have had to go to court to be able to access their rights. I think for many of us, I mean, many people ask us whether or not this is a celebration, but I think the feeling that we have is that it's also a sense of relief. Because over the past 20 years, the Women's Legal Centre and many other organisations have been lobbying, have been advancing the rights of Muslim women. And because the challenge that we have is that broadly, not just Muslim marriages, but religious marriages in South Africa over the past 23 years has not been recognised. And the consequences of that is that there is no legislative protections for them. And the extreme of that is that upon the dissolution, whether or not it's death or even divorce, the challenge that you're sitting with is that women and children in particularly, they are being disadvantaged by that. Challenges is around maintenance, it's around the patrimonial benefits. And the extreme of that, we have seen women at the end of the day that get evicted with their children out of homes that they have lived in for more than 20, 25 years. Some of the other problems is that the marriages in itself is not even, it's not recognized, but there is also no registration process. So I think it's very undignified for a woman also who just, where her husband maybe passed away, that on the death certificate it says they were unmarried. And I think for many people, I mean, to be able to see that and to be able to say that after 40 years that I've been married, that in this country my marriage is still not seen, it's not recognized. And I think those challenges, whether or not it's through the Wills Act or whether or not it's in terms of them accessing these benefits after death or even after a divorce.
Siham, this is incredible.
Battle.
It's incredible stuff that you're telling us.
Even though the courts have come to the rescue over the past 20 years, the problem is that it's not sustainable because we all know taking matters through the court, it's quite expensive. So we welcome this judgment because the court has given us, or at least the state, 24 months to be able to bring in legislation. And in the event that the state does not bring in that legislation, there is an interim provision that says that the Divorce Act will apply up until that particular legislation comes in. And I think that for us is the victory. It has given us a path. It has given us a way to be able to move forward. And I think for all of us working within this particular field, how is it that we are going to be able to ensure that the rights of women, or in particularly Muslim women, is recognized during this process?
Okay. Siham, thank you for that. Yesha, I'm going to bring you into the conversation shortly. Just, sorry, hang 1 second. I just want to ask one final question over here to our guest in the Johannesburg studio, Professor Esak, because I know he's got to go. Prof, from what you've heard, I mean, I'm blown away by the fact that some of these things are actually happening. You know, obviously not being a Muslim myself and married under those, you know, I actually can't believe that those are going. I mean, this is a victory for women's rights.
Oh, absolutely, and it's an astounding victory despite the noises that have been coming from more traditional quarters. I mean, the reality is this, that very often, I mean, we live in a men's world and we are oblivious to all the quiet kind of sufferings, but it's families like this. I mean, imagine, upon the death of your husband, you figure out that you've never been married, you're not entitled to. I mean, the tragedy is that the world of men often, both in the case of the traditional world, as in indigenous traditional cultures, as well as in the case of many religious communities. And here particularly I think of the Jewish community and I think of the Muslim community, that the plight of the women, it's quite precarious. Unfortunately, minority communities often tend to, let's keep our dirt, you know, to ourselves. Let's not hang our dirty linen out for the public to see. And so it is at times like this, with a victory like this, that the more unsavory practices inside the community comes out. But also the fact, I mean, it is tragic that it took 23, 24 years for this to be recognized. But at the same time, it's also an indication of our courts and their commitment to ensuring that the constitutional requirement of gender equality is upheld.
Because when we look at marriage as an institution, as much as it's about love and children and all of these wonderful things, there's also the socio-economic aspects that go with it. And when I talk about the source of socio-economic benefits, I'm talking about a right to inheritance, medical insurance coverage, adoption, spousal benefits, bereavement leave, tax advantages, post-divorce rights. I mean, do these rights apply as it stands now within the Muslim community and marriage?
Some of them, yes. Some of them, no. But they're not taken for granted. The de facto position is no. and then you have a more generous dispensation depending on what kind of negotiation the couple themselves engage in. But on the whole, the automatic benefits or the default benefits goes to the male, and the default benefits goes to the male's family in the event of a death. And so there's been very technical understandings towards Islamic law that have been applied hitherto, with a bit more flexibility in the south of the country than in the north of the country. And so sadly, the onus is then on the court and on the legal system in our country to force traditional communities, and here I include the Muslim communities, to be more up-to-date in ensuring greater justice for women who are inside marital relations or inside cohabitation relationships.
And also the polygamous marriages, that also...
That is particularly onerous.
Yes, that's a difficult
That
one.
is particularly onerous because sometimes the man may be married technically to one spouse, but is not married to the other two or three. I mean, the maximum that is allowed in Islam is 4. He's not married. And so those other spouses are left with absolutely nothing. He may even have been married to one of those other spouses right from the beginning until the end. So on the whole, the law has been very, very unjust towards Muslim women, and upon deaths especially, or upon divorce, that is where they see the consequences. And this goes some way in addressing those imbalances.
Okay, Prof, I know you've got to go, but my final and if you can answer this very quickly, the consequences, what are the consequences it'll have with the recognition of Muslim marriages in the Constitution have on Sharia law? What are the consequences?
That's a fascinating one. I have no doubt that it will serve to limit the way in which Sharia law is dominantly understood in South Africa. It will delimit that. Sharia law by itself does not acknowledge the principle of the equality between men and women. It does acknowledge the question of equity, but not the principle of equality as enshrined in our country's constitution. And so Sharia law would... Now, first of all, I mean, the constitutional dispensation can't actually affect Sharia because Sharia is also implemented or not implemented in many other countries. But it is going to force Muslims to rethink and to contextualize their own law and find creative ways, as minorities often do, in living with the dominant constitutional, and in our case, a very progressive constitutional dispensation on the one hand, and negotiating their religious identity, culture and laws on the other. But throughout the ages, religious communities have done this, and they've done this mostly successful.
Prof, thank you. Thank you for your time. I will let you go and continue my conversation with the ladies in Cape Town. Professor Farid Esak is the head of religious studies at the University of Cape Town, of Johannesburg, I beg your pardon. So moving into our Cape Town studios now, I want to bring Ayesha Royker into the conversation. Ayesha, thanks for your patience and for standing by with us. I want to ask you, on a little bit more of a personal basis, I suppose, what has your experience been in a Muslim marriage?
Well, and I was married for 19 years, and after 19 years I was given a talaq, and as a consequence I was left without any cut and dried entitlement to a share in what my former husband and I had accumulated over the years. So my incident's not isolated. These are, there are thousands of women that experience the same thing, where you contribute towards the family, you contribute towards possibly a business or towards the upkeep of the house, but upon the dissolution of your marriage, you are then left without anything. Often the man is historically the man has always been in a stronger financial position, and we contribute to the home, but you cannot quantify that contribution, whereas a man can possibly quantify financially what he's given. So that's what we, as women, what we experience, that we contribute, but upon the dissolution, we are left with nothing, or we have to go to the courts for recourse, because if we go to the religious authorities, they have no legal standing to enforce the rights that our religion gives to us, the right to earn, the right to retain our earnings for ourselves, the fact that the husband has a duty of support for the wife. Even after divorce or after death, she should be entitled to some form of support. the fact that it is his responsibility to upkeep the children. These are all things that cannot be enforced, and women are left financially depleted. It takes an effect emotionally, physically on them. It is time consuming if they need to go to court. The wheels of the judiciary turn extremely slowly. We can see with this application of the Women's Legal Centre, and the previous attempts to get legislation, we find that it is time consuming, and as a result, a lot of women do not go the legal route. Yeah. We also have the stigma of divorce. So you stay in the marriage. Our religious leaders tell us this is a test from Allah, that you must, Allah will only test you as much as you can bear, and you need to go back, you need to stay. Divorce is not a lichen, Allah is not happy when there's divorces. So we women, we end up staying in abusive marriages. We end up staying in, and when I say abuse, it's not necessarily physical. There's financial, there's emotional, because we don't have any other option. Court is always the last option for us. But those of us that can afford it, we take that route. And those of us that cannot afford it, we just try and make ends meet at the end of the day.
Amazing. So, with this ruling, obviously, things are going to change dramatically. I know that, as we heard from Prof, this has been 23 years in the making, and the courts have been dragging their feet on this issue, while women have honestly been struggling and have had really no rights if we look and read into this quite carefully. Siham, what was at the heart of the court application? I've gotten a bit of a glimpse into some of the hardships of being faced by women in Muslim marriages, but what actually was the turning point where it was like, this is it, we're now going forward and we've got to change this?
Well, like Aisha said, the launch of the case was in 2014, but there has been a few cases before 2014, and I think the turning point for us, or at least the Women's Legal Centre, after we have done or brought cases, numerous cases to the Constitutional Court, to what we call almost like a piecemeal application, where we brought rights or gave rights to women. As I've indicated earlier, that approach is expensive, and it's also not sustainable, because after those processes there was the two bills that came before Parliament, and the problem that we sat with is that it went nowhere. And so by 2014, the challenge was that what do we do? The state was not moving in relation to bringing legislation, and we were sitting women were placed in a problematic position, because their marriages were not recognized. The religious authorities could not enforce or at least the religious orders. The problem that we sat with is that there were so many women that could not afford to go to court. And what did we do? We brought this case in the public interest on behalf of all those women that have come to the centre, all those women that have gone to different organizations, and to be able to say at the heart is that there was a failure on the part of the state to protect the rights of Muslim women. Okay. We also said that Muslim women is not a homogenous group. We need to be able to see Muslim women within the context of our own South African history, which means that black South African women were historically disadvantaged. And those type of disadvantage moved into their marriages. And upon the dissolution, they move out of the marriages, like what Aisha said, with absolutely no benefit. And the emotional, psychological traumas on those women, we have seen these effects. And that was the primary reason why we brought this particular case, to be able to ensure that the state fulfill their particular rights. And this is exactly what the court said. The court said that there was a failure, and that the state has to remedy this failure by bringing in legislation within the next 24 months.
Well, there you have it, a victory for women, Muslim women in particular, and this is something that we'll be watching over the next 24 months. It needs to be rectified, that legislation to recognize marriages solemnized in accordance with the tenets of Sharia law as valid marriages, and to regulate the consequences of such recognition need to be done. To my ladies that are in the Cape Town studio. We thank you so much. Siham Samai, who is director at the Women's Legal Centre Trust, and Ayesha Royka talking to us from the perspective of a woman who was married under this law and who'd gone through a divorce. So thank you to Our Lady.